I want to go cognitive, because at the end of the day, you can feel great, look good, but thinking clearly, I mean, if that's the single most important asset, right?
Yes.
Just when your brain is on fire and you've got clarity and you're enjoying life, you're experiencing full spectrum of everything. Let's go there. How do you
Okay.
how do you rate your cognitive ability right now on a 0 to 10 scale?
My brain has never worked better in my entire life, Peter. I love this. And people look at me and say, how do you remember all this stuff? And the answer is complex, but I have this whole picture for longevity and aging. And I remember a Delta 5 desaturated. I don't know. The reason is because it's all in a picture in my head that I could not do when I was 25 or 30. And I use a variety of compounds, some pharmaceutical, a lot of them natural. I've been formulating and taking nootropics for 25 plus years. And I'm taught by the guy who wrote the first newsletter called Smart Drug News, which was a print newsletter in the 80s, was my mentor. His name is Steve Folks, just a total genius of a biochemist. And so this has helped. I've also spent 6 months of my life with electrodes glued to my head, developing and perfecting the 40 Years of Zen program, where 1,500 elite executives have come through and reprogrammed their brains to be less triggered.
I'm coming through soon. I promised myself that as a gift.
Oh, anytime, Peter. Have you talked to Naveen? He just went through. He's been real public about it. Okay.
Yeah, I have. And let's dive into nootropics. So define nootropics and what are you doing? I want me some.
All right. Nootropics are compounds that enhance cognitive function. And people say, well, hold on, is that a drug or is that a nutrient? It doesn't really matter. If it makes your brain work better, it's a nootropic. So there are nootropic drugs and there are plant compounds. The two drugs that are probably most impactful, one of them is modafinil.
Yeah.
This is actually, I had to create a new category of drug. It's called arousal promoting because it's not a stimulant. And it affects dopamine and something called orexin in the brain. It has a very good safety profile, safer than Advil, but about 5 out of 1 million people can have a genetic reaction to it. Same exact reaction that Advil can cause. It's actually a life-threatening skin reaction, but it's exceptionally rare.
And full disclosure, I use modafinil and have been for some time. And I have spoken to every neurologist that I ever speak to. I ask the question, how do you feel about modafinil? What's the downside? Is there any addictive elements? Is there any, elements that are suppressive of other part of mental cognitive function? And so far, I've not received any warnings that concern me at all.
The only one that might matter is it does increase histamine in the brain. Histamine's a neurotransmitter. It's not all bad. Mm-hmm. And there are some people who get hives from it. So if you have weird allergic responses when you take it, maybe no. But in terms of long-term harm, I've been on this since about 2001. And I went to Daniel Amen's clinic. And today I'm so grateful to be on the Amen Clinic's board of directors. That scan changed my brain because it documented a hardware problem. One thing that modafinil does, it increases blood flow in the brain. And this is one of the nootropic effects that you want to look for is how do I get blood up there? And I had brain damage from toxic mold exposure, and that meant low blood flow. So when I'm modafinil, that's why I graduated from Wharton Business School, because I was on modafinil and my brain wasn't working very well at the time. And so I had to fix it. The other pharmaceutical that is worth noticing, there's a class of compounds called the racetam, R-A-C-E-T-A-M. And piracetam is the most famous. This was made by Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. It still is. And it wasn't even in the PDR, the physician's desk reference in the US for many, many years. Probably still isn't. It's almost like it doesn't exist here, even though it's sold by Big Pharma in Europe. And there's an analog that's fat soluble called aniracetam, A-N-I-R-A-C-E-T-A-M. I have been on aniracetam most days for 25 years. There's two reasons. One is it's neuroprotective of the brain. Two, it increases memory I/O. Peter, you and I are both, engineers. You're a doctor, I'm not. But input-output bandwidth is one of the primary performance enhancers of computing systems. In fact, I'm a network engineer by training in Silicon Valley. So more I/O? You mean maybe I remember stuff because I'm doping for my brain? Yes. So can you, and your brain will probably last longer if you do this. So aniracetam and modafinil are the two big ones. And then from like a other cognitive enhancing function, my big book on brain function hit the New York Times list, sandwiched between Homo Deus and Sapiens, which is like the hugest honor ever.
That's fantastic.
And it's called Headstrong. And the two big theories in that are, number one, increase mitochondrial function in the brain via any means necessary. And I go through those. And the second one is increase BDNF and NGF. And BDNF is brain-derived nootropic factor. This is a compound that causes nerves to grow. Mm-hmm. And nerve growth factor does the same thing. It turns out there are some supplements and some practices that will cause this to happen. So if you have the neuroplasticity of a young person because your brain can change itself, and you have enough energy to do it, you'll have a nootropic effect. So I even interviewed Eric Kandel, who won the Nobel Prize in 1994 for proving neuroplasticity was real. And if I talk about an unusual guy, 94 years old, still has a lab off Central Park and just nice. Cranking away on new ideas to this day because he gets it. So how do you raise BDNF? Well, exercise, intermittent fasting, some of the core biohacks I've been writing about for a long time, and so have you. But there are also some plant compounds that raise this and some interesting pharmaceuticals. The number one plant compound is, lion's mane, mushroom. Yep. Problem is, it doesn't work. I got so excited when I read the studies. I took lion's mane, every kind, for 3 years and gave up on it back when I started Bulletproof before I left the company. And I found out the reason is that for this to work, you have to have fruiting bodies and it has to be extracted with alcohol and hot water. So a high quality one will work, but the stuff they put in coffee doesn't do anything. And you'll know it's working because if you take lion's mane or anything that raises BDNF, you have vivid dreams. It's a very good sign that it's working.
I can imagine that. Sure.
Yeah.
Neuronal growth is going to excite functionality while you're sleeping.
I actually just had a couple PhDs in the studio about 15 minutes ago here, working with a supplement called Broccolite. And they went through a bunch of research on how it increases BDNF. So this is sulforaphane from cruciferous vegetables. Yeah. And the hack for listeners is, if you're not going to use a supplement, if you're eating, say, cooked broccoli, you need a bite of radish or a bite of raw broccoli to activate the enzyme that lets the sulforaphane out of cooked broccoli. So cooked broccoli won't affect brain function. Cooked broccoli with a little bit of raw will.
How is that? I mean, I don't need to go into detail here, but I love broccoli and I love sulforaphane. I mean, my number one food, is if you said, okay, what's the food you would not want to eliminate from your diet right now? It's broccoli. I love broccoli with olive oil and lemon. That's what I will obsess on. But why the raw broccoli requirement?
When you cook broccoli, you inactivate the enzyme that releases the sulforaphane.
And it's present in, and if you get it, a little bit of it, it cascades and provides release.
Yeah, it turns out it's a very active enzyme. So all it takes is one radish or even a slice of radish. So when you were going to the Upgrade Cafe in Santa Monica, whenever you had cruciferous veggies, there was always a piece of watermelon radish on top to activate the enzyme. That was there for a reason. And it's funny. It's so active. If you wanted to be really fancy, you would take like one little stalk and just smash it, because the more smashed it is, more exposed to air, the more of the enzyme is released. And then you just have one bite of that, and then your broccoli does something extra for you. And I would put that in the realm of nootropics. And interestingly, almost every psychedelic, I'm working on these for my book that'll come out later, sometime in 2025. Don't even know the title yet. Almost every psychedelic increases BDNF meaningfully. And the one that I'm most intrigued with is ketamine, because it's legal and well studied. So I just hired Dr. Mark Bronstein to be the medical director for me at 40 Years of Zen. So we're using ketamine as an optional add-on on top of intense personal development neurofeedback, because every dose of ketamine, even a low dose, not the kind where you're going to go, see aliens. This is a low, it's called a psycholytic dose. It causes 72 hours of profound brain plasticity. So that if you're going to be doing some resetting of old patterns, you might as well have a brain that's ready to receive a reset with less work. And so ketamine, DMT, LSD, and psilocybin work, I'm even an investor in Paul Stamets's company, where he said, well, what happens if you stack lion's mane and psilocybin and a B vitamin called niacin that causes vasodilation?
Yes.
Well, he's showing whole brain nerve regeneration. Right now, lion's mane and all the other ones, they only do hippocampal regeneration. So he's fixing things that are brain injuries and things like that. And if you stack that with hyperbaric, and I've got a hard-sided OxyHealth chamber, the medical grade one downstairs, that also will regrow things in the brain. So if you stack your hacks in the right way for your goals, there's an argument. But there's two other nootropics that we just have to talk about because they're the most common ones out there. And some people are already triggered going, you can't talk about nootropics. That's cheating. Okay. 90% of the population has this one. This is caffeine.
Yes.
Okay. Caffeine is a well-studied nootropic.
I love that you tattooed caffeine on your arm. It's funny, right? Because I talk about, the reason I memorize caffeine structure and name is, it's important to know what drug you're addicted to when you end up on an alien planet so you can recreate it there.
Okay. That is awesome, Peter. I loved you before, but I love you even more now because you're such a nerd. I love this. Like this one, I need this one. The reason I tattooed it there is way back in 1991 or 92, I sold a t-shirt with that molecule printed on it. It turns out it was the first product ever sold over the internet before the web browser was invented. Okay. So the first e-commerce on the planet was a caffeine t-shirt.
Love it.
And I sold it to 16 countries out of my dorm room. So this is like, plus Bulletproof was a big company and now Danger Coffee is getting big. So it's like caffeine has served me well. And so how could I not have fun with it? If I had a tattoo on the other arm though, it would be nicotine. And this is the controversial one. You want to talk about a well-studied smart drug. You'll type 15% faster on modafinil or nicotine. Almost every great work of literature was written on caffeine and nicotine, and not very often alcohol or THC. They're not good for cognitive enhancement.
I get that. Are you doing nicotine and modafinil at the same time?
Yeah, you want to have a great day. So here's the thing about nicotine. Smoking and vaping will shorten your life. They are bad for you. Right? So when I say nicotine, everyone hears tobacco. No, this is pharmaceutical nicotine extracted from tobacco. One cigarette has 20 milligrams. I'm talking 1 to 5 milligrams of nicotine delivered either orally or through the skin.
How do you do that? How do you deliver your nicotine?
I usually use a nicotine spray, and you can buy it in Mexico, Canada, all of Europe, all of the Middle East, and Australia, but it's not approved in the US. It's from Nicorette. God knows why. So in the US, you can get little sachets. Lucy gum is good, but watch out for artificial sweeteners in them. You don't want that. You what?
What's it called? Lucy gum?
Yeah, Lucy. ChewLucy.com or .co or something like that. And full disclosure, I'm a small investor advisor, but I just wanted a nicotine without NutraSweet in it because NutraSweet is not good for brain function. So why would I want to take a cognitive enhancer that also punched my synapses in the face? That seems rude.
I love this story. I love this study done years ago in university students, and they studied a whole slew of drugs to determine what increased their test scores. And there were two particular molecules that increased their test scores the most, and it was glucose and caffeine. Coca-Cola.
I actually write about this for college students. I'm like, guys, if you really want to ace the test, you need to test yourself ahead of time so you know dosing. But it's probably double espresso with sugar and 1 to 2 milligrams of nicotine. And you go into this hyper focus mode and just you can do anything and everything is easy and it's all right there. And the problem is nicotine is addictive. And when you're young, I don't think you want to use it regularly. At about age 40, I recommend 1 to 3 milligrams a day. The reason for this is research out of Vanderbilt. Dr. Andrew Newcomb, I believe is his name. I call him Dr. Nicotine. He's been publishing study after study showing that nicotine stops Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. You don't want neurodegeneration. Yeah. So is it possible that we threw the baby out with the bathwater and that smoking is bad for you, chewing is bad for you, tobacco is bad for you, but a tiny dose of pure nicotine is cognitively enhancing so you feel good now and you don't have an aging brain? I think so. It's part of my recommended stack for people, but it's controversial.